Hi friends, I'm Brad Wetzler. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome if you're new here. Over the next month, I'm going to be releasing new videos about memoir writing, and I thought I'd spend a little bit of time today reintroducing myself and how I became a memoir teacher and coach and basically a memoir expert here on YouTube. My book, Into the Soul of the World, my memoir, was published in 2023, 2 years ago, by Hachette, one of the big five publishers, and it tells the story of how I became a successful magazine writer and adventure writer, and then how my life fell apart due to undiagnosed PTSD and an addiction I was dealing with, and depression, and then how I pieced my life back together through travel again, through learning how to be in community, through therapy, through yoga, through my own spiritual seeking, and eventually even the love of my dog, and how eventually I healed my PTSD and then was able to tell the story about it. So I hope you will check out that book, Into the Soul of the World. And it's at your bookstore and also on Amazon as well. So how to begin? I went to graduate school in journalism at Northwestern University. And as soon as I graduated, I landed a job at Outside magazine. And back in the 90s, when this was, Outside was a thriving, vibrant magazine about travel, the environment, and adventure, and sports in general, outdoor sports. And I worked my way up the masthead and eventually became a senior editor and worked with some of America's finest journalists and adventure writers and magazine writers, and had a very successful time there at Outside. And then eventually I left the magazine to become a writer. The magazine did not have writers on staff, and so in those days you had to leave and become a freelance writer. And so I continued to work for Outside magazine, traveling around the world, and I also then worked for the New York Times and GQ and Wired, Travel and Leisure and Men's Journal and other magazines like that, and wrote dozens if not hundreds of articles, and again traveled all over the world doing this, and also wrote about politics. I wrote for George magazine, which was John F. Kennedy Jr.'s politics magazine that was around in the late 90s. And again, as I mentioned, eventually all of that fell apart for me, and I found myself having my own dark night of the soul, and it lasted a few years. And then on the other side of that, I hit the road again, and I went to Israel and Palestine and walked in Jesus's footsteps, and it was something I wanted to do. I wrote an article for the New York Times as well as for Newsweek about both traveling in Israel and Palestine. And in those days, I was trying to reconnect with something of my youth. When I was a kid, I'd been an adamant Christian, and at that time, this was in 2012. I just was curious about what that meant to me as a young man, and I was no longer a Christian, and just sort of explored what Jesus, who he was, and who he was for me, and whether his message had anything to say to me anymore. And so I spent 10 weeks on a pilgrimage in Israel and Palestine. And then when I came back, I realized that I could not, at that time, be a Christian again, but I began more serious spiritual seeking. And around this time, I began to teach memoir writing in Denver, Colorado, at a couple of writers' workshops. And I became the lead memoir teacher for a place called Lighthouse Writers Workshop, and began to really study memoir. I'd written a lot of first-person articles. I really knew that format about writing about travel for one thing, but also about one's life. And at that time, I began to think about writing my own memoir. And over the next several years, I developed my chops as a memoir teacher, and began to edit memoirs, and as well as to coach memoirs one-on-one. And I started my own business to as an editor and a coach, editing and coaching memoirists. And this was about 12, 13 years ago. So now I've been doing this for 12 or 13 years, and I've edited dozens of books. Several of them have been published by major publishers, and I work one-on-one with people as well as teach classes in memoir. And the things I like about memoir is first of all, it's just such an honest form of writing, when done well. And it draws on some of the techniques and tools and craft of fiction writing, but also you're able as a writer to say what's true for you, to say the truth, or to be as honest as you can, to say what you mean and mean what you say. And so this format has just become very dear to me. And I love helping people to find their voice, to tell their stories, and I see them transform as they write their stories. You know, this is not just an art form where you put your art on the page, release it to the world, and you're the same person you were before you wrote it. You are utterly changed by the process of writing a memoir. I was utterly changed by my memoir. Many of the things that I'd been struggling with faded into the rearview mirror when I wrote and published my memoir. You know, the things that haunted me, once I told my story and put them in story form, I was able to release much of it. And I've seen this happen over and over again with my clients and students. They come to their stories, they know they have a memoir in them, they're unsure of how to begin, or maybe they've already begun, but they've gotten stuck and trapped in their minds. And I, allow them to pull apart the memories and to finally piece them back together in a story of transformation. And I'd love to help you too to do that. And I will be doing that here on video over the next several weeks. So stay tuned for more videos, and I'm wishing you all the best.